When you look at this proposal, which extends the elementary day by 44 minutes and starts our secondary day 30 minutes later, the discussions in our district around our elementary student day have been happening for long before I came to town. The idea of the elementary day and the needs related to student learning came to me from a former curriculum director, longtime teacher and principal here, and I named him earlier, Brian Peters. I'll name him again in case you don't like this idea. But we were in a school, and there was a student receiving services from an instructional support teacher while the student was missing writing instruction to receive targeted reading interventions. When I asked him why, we went through all of the scheduling of the student, the core teacher, the specials, the IST, and all the other students on her caseload. In the bottom line, it came down to time constraints and trying to prioritize within those. When we began discussing how we might do a little better with time and increase that elementary day, I naturally brought my bias and experience to the table, and that was to pretty much consider what every other public school system in our state does. So we looked at this, and we initially thought about, well, let's just extend the elementary day and have the kids get out a little later than the secondary kids. When you do that, the 3:16 dismissal time on the secondary day is a key constraint. What would have transpired if we said, let's do that, those elementary students would dismiss around 4 o'clock. If we wanted to bring that up a little bit, we could. And we did look at it. If we said 3:45 p.m., then our secondary students would have to begin school about 7:55, even 7:50 a.m., depending on what our goals would be there with the operation. We knew that was counterintuitive to a growing body of evidence about what adolescents need. So we looked at that. We then began discussions, which were ongoing for about a year, with our Teachers Association representatives. In Pennsylvania, there's collective bargaining law, and we've worked on opportunity to make some changes for over a year with our teachers. And they obviously supported it to move forward, otherwise we wouldn't be here. I want to clarify that although some teachers have said they need more, we did explicitly approach our Teachers Association and ask them to consider this. Some of that was seeded by individual teachers sharing their frustrations. However, I want to go on record that we asked our teachers to engage in this process, and that took a little over a year. And I'm proud of what transpired. We then engaged in that process, and some of these ideas, in particular the elementary day starting earlier to come up with a solution, came from those discussions and allows us to be consistent with what's evidenced as a need for secondary kids. One of the things that we don't have in the proposal is what I think is the best solution, and that's to add $3.5 million to our operating budget so we can buy another set of buses and bus drivers. We just can't do that. It's not reasonable, and it's not fair to the community. I wish we could, because then everybody can go to the school at the same time. What we came up with is an option that we worked through a lot of details for. And I think we have a choice. We can move status quo, or we can take a look at what's been developed, and that's what we're proposing. And obviously, when you look at all the specifics of it, I do think it provides our students with a better experience K-12 than where we are at this point. And I'm not trying to discredit what we're doing every day or trying to do, curriculum-wise, instruction-wise, helping our teachers to improve, any of that. I just think when it comes down to the time experiences that we have with kids, time that kids spend with teachers is valuable, and that's what we're trying to embrace through the proposal. The times here that you see that we're proposing, we've gone through a lot with our community since April, when we officially came forward publicly with this. We've adjusted the elementary day to start 10 minutes later. We think that'll give a little bit more of a window for parents and walkers as well as our buses and just the congestion on our small campuses that would happen if we started at 8 a.m. So we think it's a little bit better than where we were in April. if you said, hey, let's reduce some of the time in either of the days, your elementary opportunity would be at the end of the day. You could bring that off. The secondary day, you could bring time off. I wouldn't suggest off the end of the day, but you can't bring it off in the morning because of the elementary busing. You just need the turnaround time. So there are built-in constraints to this. I kind of went through that in April a little bit, but I just wanted to point that out again. I also note that our Delta programs align with our secondary school times. They're a little bit within those because we run shuttles from our middle schools and our high school over to the Delta program. Obviously, once the Delta program moves into their new facility on the Westerly campus, that'll adjust things a little bit, be a little more efficient in many ways. I'm going to ask Vernon Bach to take over here on the elementary side. He'll be able to thoroughly explain it. And when we finish up with the overview here, we'll see how we're doing. If we want to take a break, Amber, field questions, needs of the board, talk about process, that type of thing. But I'd like to see if we can get through the overview. Thanks, Vern.
Yep, sure. Thanks, Dr. O'Donnell. I'm going to cover a lot of advantages that we see pertaining to the elementary level, and Dr. Stout will jump in on the secondary piece. I'm not going to provide as comprehensive of information that you saw in the memo. I'm going to hit some highlights, but certainly we'll be prepared to answer any questions that you might have. I think the key, the really important fact for me, and the I guess the staggering fact for me, is if we add 24 minutes to our instructional day at the K-5 that's focused on core learning, enrichment, and interventions, that will result in one more cumulative year of an elementary experience for our elementary students, K-5. Bill, you want to move over to the objectives. I referenced more core learning. We're increasing our day, the instructional day, from 266 minutes to 290 minutes in core learning, and obviously that's an increase of 24 minutes. We believe that this would allow our teachers to teach more in depth, allowing more time for project-based, problem-based learning experiences, more time for lab-based learning experiences, as well as time for enrichment and intervention programming that doesn't impact the core. You heard Dr. O'Donnell mention his conversation with Mr. Peters about having to pull students out of a subject to receive an intervention. This current proposal would not require us to continue to do that. Also, our hope would be, with the increased instructional time, that this will allow for a more relaxed learning environment for our K-5 students. As you know, we've recently implemented a new ELA curriculum that's focused on meeting individual students' learning needs. This type of rich student engagement that includes individual student, teacher, and student feedback sessions, along with conferencing and conferring, takes time. This coming year, we will implement a new math curriculum and following with science and social studies that will be structured similarly. Our enrichment and interventions, with our current short elementary day, you've heard us mention already that students who receive supplemental services through both are missing core learning. We believe that all students need access to the core learning experience. For example, and we mentioned it, students currently in our district to receive a reading intervention are missing science and social studies instruction. Increased specials. Students will have an additional 10 minutes daily of specials. This includes additional music, art, PE, and library, and a fifth special is being proposed during the week, and that current fifth special being proposed is world language. Obviously, recess. We've added an additional 30-minute recess during the week, as not all schools currently offer a fifth recess. We definitely recognize the need for increased physical activity for our elementary age students. In this proposal, we currently have 60 minutes set aside for lunch and recess. I'd like to engage our community and our teachers in further conversation about lunch and recess to see how we might be able to get more time for recess during this 60-minute period. World language and culture. Obviously, we've talked about that fifth special and adding a world language and culture. And we believe this will contribute to a student's ability to acquire a language later. There's a significant amount of research with foreign language at the elementary school being implemented that students, when they encounter that later in middle school and high school, they pick up the language much quicker. Our hope would be that once our kindergarten students reach sixth grade, we'd be able to offer a full world language experience for high school credit. I've seen that happen in a previous district, and 78% of our students earned a high school credit in 6th grade. Consequently, students took a world language in 7th grade and 8th grade, meeting their full world language requirement for college and middle school, thereby opening up their high school schedule for potentially a second language and additional options for scheduling. And finally, we've heard some concern about music ensembles. Want to engage in hearing from parents and teachers as to where this would best occur if our proposal is accepted. We're looking at potential options for on and off our school day.
Do you want to go back and touch on kindergarten and homework though, or were you not going to on that list?
Sure, I can touch on. Currently, in our proposal, we are not proposing additional time for homework, and I know that came up as a potential concern tonight. We're not implementing additional curriculum. Again, going back to the comment I made earlier, we feel like the time during the day will allow for a more relaxed environment, more time to teach in depth with the content that we are teaching to our students. So there would be no additional homework. I think we will be revisiting that with the board moving forward to propose a potential policy and adjustment to the policy moving forward. The kindergarten, the options for kindergarten, and thank you, Dr. Bader, for mentioning that. I did want to touch on that. We do have options for our kindergarten students. We do have several families who take advantage of our half-day kindergarten option. I will say that most families who do take advantage of that at the beginning of the year, generally their students are attending our full-day kindergarten by about October timeframe. What we hear from students and parents is that they're excited and they don't want to stay home for the half day. They want to be there to participate in the activities, but that will be an option. And I, with that option, we want to make sure that we're offering our core learning experiences in the morning with reading and math, so that students wouldn't miss that core learning experience if the families did elect for half-day kindergarten. The other thing I want to mention and just make very clear is, our school day and our classrooms are very different from how they were structured when we were all students. It's very, very unusual for me to be in any of our classes at the elementary level to see instruction going on for 20 minutes without a transition occurring. There's constant movement, there's constant flexibility, students are engaged in station-based instruction, and there's natural transitions that are just built in during the day. So it would be highly unusual, and I would have concern if I walked into a classroom and saw students sitting for more than 20, 30 minutes at a time. The other piece that I would like to mention regarding kindergarten, we're very interested in offering those developmentally appropriate activities where we've heard from our kindergarten teachers with the short day, they have to cover the content standards in that 6-hour and 6-minute day. So there's concern that we're not able to implement those developmentally appropriate play activities, the imaginative play, the free play, additional rest time, and maybe even a potential nap time. So we're very interested with the extended day of being able to offer those types of opportunities for our students.
I'll just, in regard to the homework, I know that our board's engaging in the review of our homework policy. As we look to the proposal in K-5 specifically, we expect to greatly reduce or eliminate the mandated daily homework, obviously not including the routine reading that we have occurring by our elementary students. But I know that's going to be an in-depth discussion for our district should the proposal move forward. But even if it doesn't move forward, we should be looking at the updated evidence regarding homework and the types of tasks we're asking students to engage in at home. Thanks. I think Will's up. Oh, I'm sorry. Is it Dr. Solik at this point?
Yep.
Oh.
Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Solik. Dr. Solik is a member of our Community Advisory Committee for Athletics, quite a long time, and we appreciate his service there, which advises our board regarding those matters. He also is a local physician who specializes in helping people with sleep disorders. So Dr. Solik, we asked him, and he has come to parent programs for us, not all, and he has committed that if we do move forward, that he would help parents with the transition and some of the things they could do at home to help their children and themselves through the transition of family routine. So thanks, Dr. Solik.
Thanks for having me. So I just want to review with you some of the medical evidence that supports what you're proposing to do, especially from the middle school and high school standpoint. Dr. Buxton stole a little bit of my thunder and started to talk about that already. He's a sleep researcher. Just to give you my background, I'm a physician here in town. I run the Mount Nittany Sleep Management Program. We're an American Academy of Sleep Medicine certified program. And I have provided the board with a couple of documents, two of which are position papers by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine that address this question directly. Before we do that, I also provided you with some graphs. I'm sorry that the audience can't see it, but I just want to teach you a little bit about sleep and what the evidence is that supports what you're going to do. So sleep's a very complex process that's regulated by multiple neural pathways and biochemical pathways in your brain, but to simplify it, it comes down to two main processes. One is your circadian rhythm, and the other is your sleep homeostasis. So if you look at this, the first graph that I gave you, number one, on the top there are black arrows that are coming down from the top of the graph. So as the day goes on, you start building what's called sleep debt. To be simplistic, you accumulate a chemical in your brain called adenosine, which starts to build up over the course of time through the day that starts to make you more sleepy. And in fact, all of you that are reaching for coffee, caffeine actually counteracts the effects of adenosine. So if you're getting sleepy right now, you're trying to counteract the effects of adenosine. But that builds up over the course of the day, and that happens to everybody over the course of the day. But we also have a circadian rhythm that's built into our body. Every cell in our body has what's called a clock gene and runs on a circadian rhythm so that during the day you're alert and during the night you're asleep and you're not alert. And so on the bottom you see there's like a lighter set of arrows that over the day your alertness increases till about a half hour ago, and then it starts to fall off. So if you're feeling a little sleepy and having trouble paying attention, that's because your circadian rhythm is kicking in and your alertness is starting to drop. And so those two things work together so that for most children and most adults, they mesh about 10 o'clock, and you start to get sleepy, and you start getting ready to go to bed. And as your circadian alertness drops off and your sleep debt increases, you go to sleep. And then you sleep through the night, your circadian rhythm drops off, and then starts again in the morning and starts building. And your sleep debt is paid back. You metabolize adenosine through the night, okay? So that's what happens normally. The issue is that teenagers are different. Their clocks are shifted forward so that and that's what I'm showing in the second graph. The one thing that also helps to put us to sleep is that about 2 hours before your normal bedtime, you start secreting a hormone called melatonin. So people have heard of that. It's a common thing that people use for sleep, but it's produced in your brain. And so that starts to be produced usually about 2 hours or more before your bedtime. So maybe about 8 o'clock for most of us, our brain has started to produce melatonin. As things get dark and the lights go down, it starts to produce melatonin. And then as melatonin increases, and that's what those lines are that go up, that also helps to put you to sleep. And so that fits in with your circadian rhythm. But when you hit puberty in your teenage years, so that in middle school and high school, that occurrence shifts forward so that even if high school kids want to go to sleep, their bodies will not let them go to sleep until later. So that they have what's called delayed sleep phase. So that instead of being kind of in sync like all of us normally are, they're shifted forward. So even if you want them to go to sleep at 9:30 or 10, unless they're exhausted from having been sleep deprived for a long time, they can't do it. Their bodies will not allow them to do it. And so about the earliest they can start to try to go to sleep is 11. And assuming that they need to, that they do things right, that their parents don't let them have electronics in their bedroom, at night, and that they're not up doing homework, till 1 o'clock in the morning, or they haven't gotten back from a bus trip for an athletic event, they should try to start to go to bed about 11. Now, one of the papers I gave you is what sleep requirements are for kids in high school years and middle school years. And those sleep requirements are way underestimated by most kids and parents. 8 to 10 hours is what high school kids should be getting as sleep. So you can do the math. If they go to bed at 11, and that's when they really can start to go to bed, don't fall asleep for a while, maybe a half hour, an hour later. If you're asking them to come to school early, they can't do it. They're actually sleep deprived. And so each day that they do that during the school year, during the school week, they're losing sleep. And that builds up over time too, and it can't be made up over a weekend. And sleep deprivation leads to all kinds of bad things health-wise. You know, it leads to irritability, depression, decreased reaction time. There's good evidence that kids that drive to school that are sleep deprived have more accidents. There are all kinds of adverse health effects. So what we should try to do is provide our kids with at least the opportunity to get 8 hours of sleep per night. And by shifting your school day forward, then you're at least giving them that opportunity. Whether they do it or not, whether their parents, you know, set the appropriate environment for them to do it is another thing. So the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, as you'll see in the one position paper I gave you, has come out saying that middle school and high school should not start before 8:30, and even later if it can. That gives kids enough time to at least try to get 8 hours of sleep per night, because that's the time frame they need to do it. If you force them to go to school earlier, you are actually contributing to their sleep deprivation. When you talk about, there's a lot of people here that, you know, have concerns about athletics. Appropriate amount of sleep is very important for reducing injuries, for healing, and for recovery time for athletes. And so that's a side thing from, I think more important is just the whole concept of being able to be awake in school and ready to go when they come to school. I mean, I'm not a teacher, but I'm sure there are plenty of teachers that see kids in the first period that are, they're not there for a while, and there's good reason for it. So there's a lot of medical evidence behind it. There's lots of references in these articles that explain everything. But there's good medical evidence to support what you're proposing to do, and it's something that the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, as a proponent for sleep health in the United States, is pushing hard. And this is all recent information. This position paper came out in February of this year, and I mean, it's a complicated decision, but from a health and medical standpoint, at least for the middle and high school kids, I think it's the right thing to do. So,
Thank you.
any questions from the
Yeah,
board members
questions?
about information or?
I think one of the questions we've heard from some community members is how this does the same evidence regarding delayed school start times for adolescents also apply to elementary school age students?
No, it doesn't, because they don't have the delayed sleep phase. So I mean, they can go to bed earlier. They need about 10 hours of sleep, but their bedtimes are a little more adjustable. The kids in high school and middle school, physiologically, they can't go to sleep early, or you know, if they try, unless they're sleep deprived, they won't go to sleep. You know, so that it's different for the younger kids.
Thank you.
So would you say it's accurate to say that the total amount of sleep is what's key for younger children, as opposed to the location during the day? I mean, as long as younger kids are getting the adequate time of sleep, the expectation would be that they are more flexible in shifting that time because they're just not locked in.
Right, they're not locked in like the high school kids are. The high school kids are locked in. They have no control over that. That's just part of the way they are.
Great, I just wanted to.
Yeah.
What
yeah.
is that age range? It probably says in the literature that you gave us, but I haven't looked at it yet.
It probably happens around like 12 to 13 or something like that, and then it goes on. You know, and people ask something about how are they going to be ready to go to work. Well, you know, when you become an adult, then you shift back. You know, so that it's mainly when you're in your teenage years and maybe early into college that you're kind of locked in physiologically to this sleep pattern, and then as you get older, then most people adjust and get back to a normal, you know, sleep pattern. So they don't have what's called delayed sleep phase. They physiologically don't have these events occur that put you to sleep later
So
in the evening.
roughly 12 to 19-ish.
Yeah, or 20 in that range, something like that. Yeah.
I'm just hopeful that my middle school daughter's in bed right now, not watching this.
I gave this talk at an elementary school, and for the audience, I gave this talk at an elementary school, and I told the people there, you may be opposed to this right now, but when your kids get to be in middle school and high school, you'll be glad that it's been done, basically. So, and they all will get there. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Feel that every morning.
Yeah. All right, so,
I
Dr.
was
Stout?
just looking at the clock, and I'm glad my presentation comes before the 10 o'clock circadian rhythm sets in for everyone in the room here. But I'm just going to talk briefly just about some of the things at the secondary level, middle school and high school, in particular the high school level that we're taking a look at in order to continue to have our students have the access to the comprehensive programs that they're used to having at State High. First area I want to talk about is the zero period. We are certainly looking to expand our offerings in the zero period. The reasoning behind that is that students who opt to can come in, before the start of the traditional school day and have access to some courses so that in the afternoon, maybe they have athletics or some other extracurricular obligation that they can leave earlier for that event and still have a full schedule while they're in the high school. And with the schedule that we're proposing, that zero period would operate from about the 7:45 in the morning till 8:30, and then with our school day, the traditional school day commencing at 8:40. Additionally, we're also looking at increasing our online and hybrid learning options. And one of the programs that we had approved last month was the implementation of the Canvas learning management system, which, as you've seen in the previous proposals, that is a very robust learning management system that will allow our teachers to create excellent, comprehensive courses through the online management system. That kids will have access to that content that previously they really only had access to that content and those courses in a brick and mortar traditional class. So I've been talking with Mr. Johnson, the high school principal, and we're looking to increase our number of online or hybrid, and we mean by hybrid learning opportunities is they would meet for a traditional class about half the time, and then the other half of the time they could be doing their work at home using our learning management system and the coursework that we provide. Also, and this is something that's not commonly promoted, we don't talk about it, you don't see it in literature, but when we talk about flexible scheduling options, I know several people spoke tonight about extracurricular and athletic obligations. And our counselors now meet with athletes and other students that have afternoon obligations and really try and work with their schedules now to take some of those core classes out of their schedule at the end of the day when they would be missing to travel for an athletic event or some other program. So, if we do decide and the board votes that we move in this direction, we will do a better job of promoting those options and reaching out to our families and our kids that have these afternoon commitments so that we can try and adjust their schedule so that they don't have a core course at the end of the day. They have an elective course that it's easier for them to make up any coursework that they would miss.
So particularly something like a lab course.
What's that?
Particularly like a lab course would be something you would try to make sure those students are not having at the end of the day.
Correct. It's difficult to replicate that type of experience in an online format. So yes, we would try and move those earlier in the day for students. And then in regard to athletics specifically, and I know our athletic director, Mr. Weekland, is here, and we had a conversation a little bit earlier, but I know Mr. Weekland has already begun reaching out to some of the athletic directors in the Mid-Penn, and actually did a fairly quick survey with a pretty good turnaround. And he surveyed, I believe it was 13 of the athletic directors responded, Mr. Weekland. And the first question was how many athletic directors or how many schools would be willing to consider more Saturday events. And 61.6% of the athletic directors said either yes or yes, either yes they would or they would be willing to take a look at that. So I consider both of those responses favorable responses. Additionally, we surveyed them to see about having double headers on Saturdays to eliminate some of these weekday travel down to Mid-Penn schools in the Harrisburg area. And 69.3% of the athletic directors said, yeah, we'd be willing to take a look at, maybe some double headers where it's appropriate on Saturdays to minimize that weekday travel for athletic events. And then the last question that we asked them was, how many schools would be willing to have later start times for athletic events during weekdays? Typically, and this is really a fall and spring sport issue because during the winter sports they're indoors, and so we can have later starts. But when you're talking about field usage and stuff, that does become an issue for spring and fall sports. But 61.6% of the athletic directors said, yeah, we'd be willing to consider with State College events starting them a little bit later to allow more time in school so that you can still get there for those events on weekdays. So that's the information that I have at the secondary level. I mean, any questions for me?
And just, when we say later, we're not talking about suggesting athletes to compete hours later. We're talking about small increments to maximize that balance, correct? In terms of, just for the community's sake. When you say later.
Typically after school would be around 4 o'clock. It could be anywhere 4:35.
Right, we're talking about a half an hour to an hour to adjustment.
And you can have lights on the facilities.
Right.
Okay.
I think that would be a question the community might ask, so just a little more specific. Great.
Will, I also think one of the problems with the mid-pen is not understanding our block scheduling, right? So they're saying like, okay, if you have Tuesday, Thursday contest one week, we'll do Monday, Wednesday, Friday the next week, which means that if it's an A-day on Tuesday and Thursday, you're hitting all A-days the following week. So I think we need to strive to get that across to them, that we can't keep impacting the same class. I mean, it sounds good on paper if you have a traditional, 5-day schedule, but we're on a block schedule.
Correct. And we run an AB block schedule, as you mentioned, so students have their classes every other day.
Right.
Yeah, Scott?
I'm not necessarily looking for something right now, but I've had various people over the last, 6 or 9 months ask why it is that we are in the mid-pen, considering the amount of travel. So perhaps that's something that could be a little bit of a conversation as to, why we haven't looked at other options, or we have looked, and this is why we are where we are, because that is a concern, and I'd hate to see, the constraints of being in a conference drive how we're doing our academic schedule and things like that. But I know that it's not a black and white, and it's not a very clear-cut conversation relative to that. So that's why I'm saying, not looking for something right now, but Chris, if you could provide some level of overview on that, because I know it's a size thing, and I know there are many other factors, but that'd be appreciated.
I think that's a great idea, because I think very similar to conversations about Memorial Field, when community members don't understand how the referendum and putting the high school kind of set us up for continuing moving forward with Memorial Field, it's a very similar circumstance. Like, as an elementary parent, I'm not familiar with the history of how the high school got into that league and why we participate there. So I think it might help a lot of elementary student parents help understand why we're in that situation. So I think
That
that's
was
a great
about
idea,
6 or
Scott.
7 years ago, right?
Can I speak to that?
Oh,
Sure.
Can you go up to the
Yeah, to the mic.
podium?
Yep.
I can give you some perspective.
Thanks.
So I've been on the CAC for athletics for 35 years, basically. And so I was around when the decisions were being made about the Mid-Penn League. I can tell you that the main impetus was the stability of scheduling appropriate competition. Before the high school joined the Mid-Penn League, scheduling games for a lot of the athletic teams, football, basketball, soccer, thinking of some of the other, volleyball, field hockey, a lot of the big sports was a nightmare for the athletic director. Just to give you an example for football, there were times where Ron Pavlechko had to schedule games with schools from Delaware, Ohio, New York. I mean, kids were traveling 4, 5, 6 hours to games for football games, for soccer games, for basketball games, because there aren't enough quad A schools around here the WPIAL, which is, the closest big conference to the West, was not really an option, and the Mid-Penn was really the only viable option. And so what it did was stabilize the scheduling for the athletic director so that there was a 2-year commitment for a core group of games of competition for your major sports that was guaranteed for 2 years. And then the athletic director could go out and supplement that with competition with other schools, but at least it gave them a set group of schools that were comparable in size that they could compete against. And it really changed the job of the athletic director dramatically. I mean, I saw Ron struggle for years.
So it's key
trying to
off
put
of this quad A level?
Huh?
Is that, it's key, it's this quad, that we're at this quad A
Right.
level?
It's like, because, Bellefonte and Clearfield and Du Bois and, the other schools around here, they don't want to play State College because we're too big. And so you have to find schools that are comparable in your size, and the Mid-Penn's the closest. Without that, a league affiliation, I mean, they were playing, a school called Salesianum in Delaware. I mean, they were, when my son played football in high school years ago, we took 3 trips to Erie for football because there were no games around here. So I think from a perspective of somebody that's been around, that has seen kids compete and have been on this committee, that to even think about getting out of the Mid-Penn would be crazy.
Well, there's
to be
not
honest
another
with you.
viable option, it sounds like.
Not to put you on the spot, I think Altoona and Hollidaysburg are quad A, aren't they?
Altoona is, but they're in the WPIAL. They joined the WPIAL. I
Okay,
think.
so their being a little bit farther west changes their dynamic
Right.
dramatically, even though they're only
I don't think the
45
WPIAL was an option when the
Okay.
Mid-Penn took place, to be honest with you. I don't think they
They
wanted to
weren't.
have anything to do with State College.
Right, that's right.
And so, the deal was that they brought in, I think Central Mountain came in originally, but I'm not sure they're in it anymore. But it was to bring in Mifflin County and State College as the 2 schools in this area that would be part of the Mid-Penn. It was a big stretch for the Mid-Penn schools to agree to come here, to be honest with you. They're no more in love with this than we are, to be honest with you. The issue with them is that they come once a year, and State College goes there, umpteen number of times per year down to their area. But 2 hours is a short trip compared to what the schools were taking before the Mid-Penn affiliation. So I would not even visit that conversation if I was the school board, to be honest with you.
Is it based on size, or is it more about the caliber of our athletes, or strictly the size of our school, our high
Size of
school?
the number of students.
It's both, I think,
Okay, so there's not like there's flexibility in that decision.
Yeah.
Where we fall. Okay, I think that's helpful for people to know.
Yeah, I
appreciate
mean,
that.
so that's just the history of it. But it really, it was a nightmare for Ron to try to fill schedules before that affiliation took place, to be honest
To
with
know.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Solik.
All right. Dr. Stout, do you have further on the secondary day, or is that?
We're going to move on to the next part on there. In regard
Laurel,
to
did you have
equitable,
Think,
we're going to have questions at the end, unless it's for Dr. Solik.
That's fine.
Is it okay? In relationship to the equitable opportunities, I'm going to turn it over to Vern here in a moment. When we think of education and serving the variety of kids that come to us, fair and equal aren't the same thing. We frame this section with growth of students in relationship to their learning as we looked at this, but we also do call out a problem that we do see in our district here with student learning. And then we also go a little bit beyond that, and Vern's going to highlight how there's a concern with almost half of our students in the learning, and he's going to share how we compare nationally. And that simply asks us a question: do we desire a little bit better than what you're seeing in the data? With that said, the growth piece is what we believe makes the most sense. It's consistent with when we look at our core pillars of the district, which are foundational. We look at responsive learning experiences for all kids is one of the 4, and another one relates to high expectations, which is relative to each kid. So that's hence where the growth piece comes in. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Vern.
So we are almost at 10 o'clock, and I know that curve is dropping. And as many of you know, I love data, but I promise I only have a few data points to share with you. I think there's no question that we're a very good school district. Worth noting is that 56% of our students in grades 2nd through 6th grade perform in the top 25th percentile on the nationally normed MAP, math, and reading assessments. That's impressive, and I think that's very noteworthy. Our students who are performing in this area are also growing more than the national average in that top quartile. So again, it's very impressive. The extended time during the day will allow us to provide more enrichment and extended learning opportunities for this group of students. I think also conversely worth mentioning, and this is a concerning statistic, is that 44% of our 2nd through 6th grade students are growing at or below the national growth averages as measured by the MAP, that same MAP assessment in reading and math. And that's obviously concerning to us, and it highlights for us a need to improve. The extended time during the day will allow for more learning experiences and opportunities for students performing in this area. And finally, the last data point, we have multiple data points at several different grade levels here, but I'll just highlight our 3rd grade. And just worth noting, our historically underperforming, or HU that you see there with an asterisk, are our ESL students, students with learning disabilities, and our socioeconomically disadvantaged students. So our 3rd grade students performing on our district or our statewide assessment, the PSSA, our underperforming students rank 378th on their performance out of 500 school districts in the state, and 375th respectively. Obviously highlighting, again, the need for us to improve in this area.
So in terms of that, it's the comparison between where they're performing and where the bulk of our student body is performing.
That's
is
correct.
What's really concerning.
That's
there.
correct. And, you know, when you notice there are 500 districts, we're actually below half. Our students there performing below half of the districts with that same subgroup, that same historically underperforming subgroup statewide. I also think worth noting here that makes up 27% of our student body in State College.
Can I relate it back?
Significant.
Relate it back to some other
Can we-
presentations in the past, just quickly, that when we talked about our work with low-achieving kids like this, that other districts, those cohort districts, they were, perhaps due to the length of their day, they were a leg up on us in terms of the performance of kiddos in those categories than ours. Ours were well below the performance of similar identified individuals, ESL, students with IEPs and so on. They were performing at a higher level than ours were at that time.
And Dr. Duffy, just to stress again, this proposal is creating more opportunities for all kids. Those kids performing in the 56% that's performing in the upper quartile, providing those extended and enriched learning opportunities, but also these students, 44% performing below the national average, and then our historically underperforming group. We do know that increased time provides more experiences, and we know our students who are performing in the historically underperforming subgroup need more learning experiences.
Thank you.
As we transition to the Vern, did you have anything else on that last piece?
Just wanted to add, again, stress the point again that this proposal, we're currently struggling. My interventionists at the elementary level are struggling because we're robbing Peter to pay Paul in many instances. We're pulling students from one content to provide an intervention in another content. And in some ways, I feel like we're contributing to a gap there because we're causing students to miss potentially science and social studies so we can provide a reading intervention. And that we're struggling with that at the elementary level.
Thanks, Vern. In regard to the transportation piece, I'm going to have Mr. Brown go through this in detail. I think one key noteworthy part is it's obvious when you look at the overall information here that we're nearly 30 minutes later with our pickup time. Currently, we start at 6:38 a.m. And the proposal does allow us to almost 30 minutes later begin our pickups rather than at that 6:38 a.m. piece. And I realize that's not all kids, so we want to get through this and get a feel for the information and see what additional questions around this particular sensitive issue. Thanks, Mr. Brown.
Sure. Thank you. The graph that is in the presentation gives you a clear synopsis of the pickup and drop-off times for our elementary and our secondary students. I'm not going to go into any more detail, but I want to give a little bit of background to the process that we've used. Our administration has worked very closely with our transportation director, Mr. Swager, after a transportation audit was completed by our Versatrans software contractor, who was our outside vendor. Mr. Swager was able to take the product of the transportation audit to then to analyze our bus routes and take our geographic area of our district by taking into consideration the fact that we have district-owned and contracted carrier buses. We're also 150 square miles, serving 7,000 students to district, charter, and non-public schools. It's a very massive undertaking. We believe that we will continue to analyze our routes and school locations in order to maximize, our efficiencies and goals of transporting students within certain time parameters. To achieve the projected results we have thus far is a significant accomplishment. We've been looking at our time of our starts and end shifts for each level. Our routes do not show significant change in duration as far as average or longest. We will continue to refine and adjust our routes in order to provide the most efficient and best opportunities for students. And as Dr. O'Donnell mentioned earlier, if we had about $3.5 million, we could then transport all students to all of our schools at the same time. But that would not be serving the taxpayers and using the financial resources to the wisest ability that we believe. If you can go on to the next slide, please. I'd like to give you an example of the changes that would be occurring. In an elementary morning, currently our earliest pickup times are around 7:34 a.m. The usual ride time or average ride time is about 23 minutes. The longest ride time is about 56 minutes. And the number of routes with a greater than 30-minute ride time at the elementary level is 11. The proposed time would be beginning at, morning routes would be beginning at 7:10 a.m. The usual ride time or average ride time would be about 25 minutes. Longest ride time would go up by a couple minutes at our closest estimates to 61 minutes. And the number of routes greater than 30 minutes would grow slightly to 14. There would be, at this point, without further analyzation and analysis, there would be about 38 students that might need to be picked up earlier than 7:10, between 7 a.m. and 7:10, but our goal would be that no students would be picked up before 7:10 a.m. At the earliest. If you can go to the evening example, we looked at the secondary students in the afternoon. Currently, their latest drop-off is right around 4:30. Their usual or average ride time is about 35 minutes. The longest ride time is about 74, and routes more than 60 minutes are 5. Proposed would have students getting home around 5:10. The usual ride time, is about 36 minutes. The longest ride time is right around 70 minutes. My eyes are really
76.
Thank you. Really getting blurry. And then the routes are more than 60 minutes is 5. Understand that that those routes, those longer routes, they are going out to the far reaches of the community. Obviously, folks that live out, can you help me out with where we talked about
Maybe
today?
potentially Marengo Road.
Yes, exactly.
Past Pine Grove Mills.
Basically, you're talking about the outer reaches of the county line close to Huntington County. Obviously, that it just takes a long time, not only for the high school students, but also for the Mount Nittany Middle School students to get out to that part of the school district.
Randy, is it okay to ask a question? The current is 4:30 for the latest drop-off, and the proposed is 5:10, but that's a 40-minute difference, but we're only looking at a 24-minute difference in terms of dismissal. Were there just some other factors involved here?
There are, and we'll continue to look
Be
at
refining that?
refining. Yes, exactly. My first thought is that the 4:30 may be a little bit early. It may be
Wondered.
closer to 4:40 till some of those students may be getting dropped off now, but I don't want to speak specifically
Okay, thanks.
without looking. You can go ahead. So looking at budget considerations, the implications for this proposal, when we had begun this process back earlier in this year, and we were completing it in our budget cycle for the 17-18 year, hoping that we might be able to implement for this current year, the total cost increase was estimated at $1.5 million. We break that down into two primary areas, the first being teaching and instruction. To add that fifth special in the elementary world we estimate would be about 8 to 10 teaching positions, but there would also be some increase in staff support hours or support staff hours with some of the different changes in the planning and other time for the students in the elementary level. So that cost is estimated at about $1 million. The other cost driver, go ahead, would be transportation. And on this slide, we're talking about transporting the SCASD students. Our original estimate was about $550,000. We believe that we can do that for approximately $250,000. There would be no increased routes at this point in time. But we're still estimating, so there may be a couple, but this is again to do district students. But where our increased costs will come would be some additional shuttles between some schools, and/or some of our bus drivers may need to work a little bit longer during the day because of the different start and end times. So again, we're revamping our system while we're running our normal operations, so we still need some more time to refine. If you can go to the next slide here, many people do not realize, or if you do, you don't understand the magnitude, but we have 4 brick and mortar charter schools, and then we have, I believe, 5 non-public schools that we are responsible for transporting within the district as well. Those schools, most of those run on the same bus schedules as our district students. And we need to be communicating with them, and this could result in a change in their student day as well. If they adapt to that, our new schedule, then a cost increase will be minimalized. However, if they do not adapt, and we are required by the Department of Education to provide the transportation to those students, then our costs will increase as more buses will be required. We're working to firm up those arrangements. Again, this is a very fluid process, and this is one area where I continue to ask Dr. O'Donnell's blessing for a little flexibility until we get some more firm commitments in this area. And so if there's an area where I'm not very firm on these estimates, this is one of those areas.
This is an area I've been directly involved with the administrators from these schools, and we've spoken with each of them, and now that we have more firm time, so to speak, with what Mr. Schwager's done for us and his team, we're going to sit down with him, the administrators of these schools, and look at what options we have for them within our current busing system to help meet their needs. They're obviously serving students from other communities as well, so they have other constraints that aren't simply within our school system. Even though they do reside in our community, they serve more than simply SCASD students. Right now, they've been very positive with the feedback, not all, and I think we have to get through some more details with them and get you an update as to where we stand with those schools.
Thank you. And the last item that I'd like to talk about is considerations. Our cost estimates will continue to be refined as we are provided with additional information. Our future planning will continue to revolve around additional support staffing needs, especially in the elementary level, additional bus driver hours for our district students, and then also understanding the charter and non-public schedule commitments. That's all.
Okay.
Nabil.
Go ahead.
As far as we wrap up here, we have some outreach information. One thing with the transportation times we didn't put in the presentation, but I added in was the Civil Dawn information. It was related to the Twilight information. I know I've been ripped pretty good on social media for that one. But it was try to put some facts in there as to when you can begin to see. And there's 3 different, I learned a lot through this. And I'm up anyways, but I learned more about when it's more visible and when it's light out, et cetera. So I did that with an effort to try to help people understand the morning times who might not be familiar, but with that
You know, the
said,
angle of the sun. And
yeah, the
I hope
key.
you blame me.
I didn't blame Jim Leos, but if he's willing to help, I did ask him because with an astrophysicist on a board, it was helpful. I also asked another board member whose spouse is pretty well learned in this area, to say the least, internationally. But in all seriousness, the sunrise piece, which is key because we talked about students who are walking to school as well, even during the shortest days of the year, is between 7:25 and 7:30. So for students who walk, now we do know that parents walk with kids. We don't simply have elementary kids walking without adults. However, I just wanted to point that out. In regard to the final parts here, the public information sessions, we have two occurring at the middle schools. We'll have those in the cafeterias, and we'll make sure we capture both the questions, respond to the questions that we're able to respond to, and capture the feedback. We'll do that with the large breakouts in the cafeterias, so we'll have a lot of big paper pieces there. We'll do a brief overview and then capture the questions and have a conversation. We'll also have all of our principals facilitate conversations and field questions and feedback and get that to us to try to make it easy for parents to engage in discussions around this as we did in the spring. Finally, in regard to evaluating how we're doing as a school system, how does this impact students? I think it really should, gear around what are the highest priorities of the school system. And I think when we look at strategic planning, that's, this is aligned with some of the goal pieces in here and the strategies that are in the draft of this. I know we're going to have more in-depth discussion coming up with the board regarding this, but I really think the goals, the measures, and the benchmarks that you want to see from us as a board, I think that's really how you should take a look at this. This is very aligned with our highest priorities, and I think aligns us a little bit more with our mission as a system. So that's our proposal to you on how should we evaluate this moving forward. There's a lot of informal and formal methods for evaluating. In the past 3 years with strategic plan, we began a new process with asking people questions around more qualitative concepts that we wanted to value and check in on. And I think that would have to hold true around some of the things that we're working on now. It's not all simply about achievement. So with that said, we're done. We'll get back to you, Mrs. Concepcion, and take it from here.